I have to say I'm not an expert on climate. I'm an architect, and I actually, during my work, I'm working on archaeological sites and archaeological heritage management in the north of Israel. And so normally it's not the consideration of climatic issues, but within my position I'm also kind of representing this governmental organization. In the old city of Akko, we have a conservation committee because it's a World Heritage City, so part of the management plan of the city was to establish this committee, and I'm representing the interest of the archaeology, but also dealing with heritage management in this city, which is very interesting, very difficult, very challenging. And by that, the issue of let's say, energy installations in a heritage city like Akko came up already to our committee, and then it started to kind of get in my mind that we really need to address this issue before it becomes a concrete problem, because the dynamics in Israel in general, and particularly in Akko, is that people are doing what they think they need or want or should do. They don't wait for the authorities to authorize or to give them permits. Sometimes they do, but mostly they just do. And then I think in this kind of environment, we have to be we have to prepare, and we have to think what would be possible within this kind of question about installing, in this case, photovoltaic. You called it solar cells. But the title of the lecture is Energy Sufficiency. So I will speak a little bit about our climate. What I will do, I took Akko as one example and Tel Aviv. So both of cities are on the coastline of the Mediterranean, and they are in many ways two extremes in terms of culture of building, in terms of social, demographic, economical structure. And so the difference is very big, but the climate is common. And we're talking about two completely different kind of architecture. One is vernacular, and the other one is modernist, both World Heritage cities. So I thought this comparison might be interesting. So I will speak also about a bit about Mediterranean vernacular architecture, about a little bit to present the old city of Akko, and also its climatic characteristics, the white city, its values, and again talking a little bit about the climatic history of this kind of architecture. Then discuss a little bit about Tel Aviv, about Akko, about the challenges we have there, mostly about anticipation for photovoltaic panels, and then a little bit thinking about the future. I've learned a lot during the 2 days, so I a little bit kind of try to adjust my speak to what we have spoken, but and I also have some points for discussion in the end, so I hope we can have some kind of insights from you about the questions I have. In this audience, that we don't need to speak too much about the conflict and between preserving heritage and promoting sustainability. It's a kind of built-in conflict in many ways, but we understand it also may be possible. And maybe I think this conference is part of this, how to put those two together. It's part of the UN SDG, affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, and climate action. So these kind of three goals are in the core of this discussion. A little bit about the climate that we are talking about. So we have been here in the northern area, and I'm talking about completely different climate. We are a little bit, or we are, Israel is there, the Mediterranean is around the 30 latitude and a little bit above until the 33 latitude. So we are bordering the desert climate already. So Israel is a very small country, but it has quite varied climatic zones, from desert to semi-alpine in the north, coastal and subtropical. But I'm going to talk about, so our climate is hot, dry summers, very long summers, and they are getting longer and longer, and mild, wet winters. So wet is almost a wishful thinking, because they're getting drier and drier also. We have less rain in the winter, and we sometimes have this strong rains in the mid seasons. But this is the basic weather we are dealing with. So hot, dry summers, and they are also on the coast very humid. There is huge humidity coming from the Mediterranean, and that will affect, and I will show why it affects our discussion. So this is the thermal discomfort or heat load, which is actually taking in consideration the temperatures and also the humidity. And this kind of combination is how comfortable you feel. I think we also talked about it, so about how comfortable we feel. And in the range we are talking in the summers in Israel, we are already around the 32, 33, 30 degrees. On the coastline we are in humidity which is something around here. So you can see the colors are getting kind of almost between orange to red, which means not an easy feeling. And this is one of the things vernacular architecture had to mitigate, or mitigated in the past, but also what do we do with that today, and how modernist architecture tried to mitigate it. And this is getting worse and worse. Those are temperatures along the coast, so you can see, I think this is summer, this is winter average, and this is summer average. But for me, those numbers look a little bit low. I think they are much higher. There were others talking about what will happen in the next 80 years or 70 years. So we are today somewhere here, and we are going to get, in the best scenario, to 2 degrees warmer Israel, and in the worser scenarios we're going to get to 4 degrees more than today, which means everything we feel hard today, it will be much harder and maybe sometimes unbearable. Yeah, it's from the Haaretz newspaper, just when I prepared the lecture, and this says that it was things we thought we know, but we actually don't know. It says that the number of consecutive days in which coastal temperature were 32 degrees and above, look what happened here from 1996 when we had, that's in Israel, 3 days, and today this year we had 88. 88, it means the whole summer, the three months in a row, and that means also that the temperatures do not go down in the evenings, in the nights. So actually it's called heat wave, continuous heat wave in a way, and this is you can see the prediction and the situation today. So the main challenges actually that we deal in Israel or in our region are about cooling and ventilation. That also was very interesting to learn about it concerning your region. So it's about ventilation, cooling, and a little bit about heating. Because, as I said, winters are becoming shorter and milder. So this is actually the picture that we should try to mitigate. I accept your remark that it's not about cooling or heating. It's more about, you said, comfort. A little bit about Mediterranean vernacular cities. So that's referring to Akko, but to many cities around the Mediterranean, mostly in the southern part, eastern part of the Mediterranean, but it also refers to cities in Europe in the southern part. It starts with compact urban layout, and those things have influence on the climate within those cities and within the houses. So first, urban structure, narrow streets and alleys, irregular patterns, so you don't have very big sun radiation in big streets or so, courtyards and patios, terrace building and streets, and structure adapted to social and religious traditions. So this is the idea that there is a certain level of moving from the public into the private. It goes well with the architecture and with the climate, but it also influences the urban layout. And regarding climate and architecture, so we have the thick walls. This is also part of the way people used to build before they have other technologies. The flat or sloped roofs, but sloped roofs are more scarce. And whitewashed walls, they're not always white really, but light colored. Small windows and shading, that's obvious. The use of local materials, which are kind of fitting to the climate, orientation of the facades, and ventilation, which we talked about it. So there are many more other things, but it's not a lecture about vernacular Mediterranean cities. But those things, I think, they are part of the way we should look also on the climate issue. So first I start with Akko. Akko is on the northern part of the country, on the coast. It's been a human settlement for more than 6,000 years, from many periods. I'm not going to speak all about that, but this picture is from the Crusader period, the siege of Akko, which at that time Akko became the main city of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, of the Crusaders, and it became a very big city. 40,000 people used to live there. It was main port, and it is also was very important for the European as a connection with Europe. So the foundations of the city that we know today, the old city, is actually from this period. Later on, it was conquered by the Mamluks, by the Muslims, and was kind of neglected and left for ruins for 300 years. And then in the middle of the 18th century, one of the local rulers rebuilt Akko because he understood the economical potential of this city as a port city, because it was the only natural port along the eastern coast of this country. And in 1799, Mr. Napoleon Bonaparte arrived on the gates of Akko after during his Middle East trip, and conquering trip, and he tried to conquer Akko, and he didn't succeed. And it's something amazing that the people of Akko, the local people of today, they're still very proud on that fact that they were able to. It was a help of the British, but they take the credit that they could push Napoleon away. And Akko is a city with walls around it and with a port. And the story of Napoleon is very interesting. That's how the city looks. It's sitting on a peninsula. It's surrounded by walls, and it has all kind of features which I don't have the time to tell. But it's really an amazing, interesting, and complex place. I will tell a little bit more about the population. But first, I will say that it was nominated and declared as World Heritage City in 2001, the second Israeli site after we have ratified the World Heritage Convention. And the criteria were that it's a medieval Crusader buildings which are underneath an Ottoman 18th century, 19th century city. So these double layers are very important. Then the story of the Crusader is, of course, because of its importance. And thirdly, that it is still presenting typical urban components of Ottoman 18th and 19th century city with citadel, mosque, khans, etc., but also housing, which they didn't mention it, but actually that's maybe the most important part is the population which lives there today, and we try to facilitate World Heritage together with a living city, which is also a tourist destination with all. So some pictures of the city as it is today, and some pictures as it was a few decades ago. One of this is the architecture of Caravanserai, Hans. This place is now becoming a hotel, so it doesn't look like that anymore. Typical house with windows to the sea, ventilation, as we spoke. Those windows which are on top usually, and they have ventilation. You can see them here. Yeah, this is kind of a lot of mosques, and also dealing with the humidity and salts from the sea. The stone of the city is, we talked about it at lunch break, is a conglomerate. It's actually a sandstone mixed with all kind of shells and things, and it's a very porous stone, so it takes humidity in with salts, and if it's not being, if you don't let it evaporate, then the stones break from the crystals, and therefore we have this issue of breathing of the plasters and of the stones, and this is one of the things we have to explain to the local people today. They are not Mason people, so they don't understand this logic, and they use cement, etc. So a lot of things. What is interesting to see is the structure of the streets, which is the main streets are going north-south, and this north-south direction in our region is a very important feature in cooling down those main streets, because the sun mostly is hitting from the east and then from the west. At noon it's above, but it's easier to shade, and therefore this orientation is very important, and repeating also afterwards. Then we have kind of a typical neighborhood of living neighborhood, and you can see how many patios and in squares there are, or there were. This is a British map from 1929, which was adopted. What is also interesting to see that in a map of Sanudo, which is the first map we have from Akko, St. John the Acre, whatever name you want to call it, we can see that this structure of street is still there in the medieval time. So I think somebody mentioned yesterday that cities that can keep their structure as it was, it's already one of its attributes or values. That so Akko kept it, and we can see that it was also important in those days. This is a photo from the RAF from 1944, which I personally like very much, because it really shows the structure of the city and the fortifications from Napoleon, before Napoleon and after. And the city has changed a lot, but it has still the features, as I said, markets, walls, khans, etc. There are around 5,000 residents in the old city, and 95 of them are Arab Muslims. It's very important to say. It's because it also says a lot about the socio-economical status and state of those citizens, and their ability to handle those World Heritage demands, and understanding those values and also investing in it. It's very low in social economical grade or scale in Israel, so it's 3 out of 10. And I mentioned the electricity because we talk about electricity and energy, and then it's all from the national grid, and a lot of illegal and improvisations, connections, and things which are done by the people themselves without. So the reality is I will go back to it afterwards, about the conflict between the residents and the government and the municipality, which is part of the discussion also for me. This is typical housing vernacular architecture that we have as living units with the interior square or a court or a space. We have normally a ground floor which is very high and vaulted with vaults, and over there it used to be in the past a courtyard, and then they closed it and then they put merchandise or animals, things like that, on the lower floor, and the families lived in the upper floor, and sometimes there is a third floor. So what can we say about climate changes or climate challenges? So first we have a division of high ceiling. So one of the things was that high ceilings let the heat accumulate in the upper part and be ventilated out. But what happened that since 1948 there were a lot of refugees, Arab refugees, moving to Akko, and there started to be a huge housing problem. And then people, what they did is they took, so instead of the air going up, they divided this one big high unit into two units, and then there is a floor in between, and there is windows up and window down, and the big window which used to be there, beautiful window, this one is completely gone and blocked. So the whole circulation of the air is changing within this, and we have this phenomena a lot in Akko. So we have the air condition condenser on the facade. I have to say something. I mean, air condition is a must in a way. It's very difficult without. And I think we need to find ways how to air condition or cool the houses. It was mentioned today with green energy or with energy which is not fossil. But it will be very difficult in Israel, and I don't know, maybe you as a tourist, you went to those areas of work. It's very difficult in the 21st century to live without it. It's a fact. So we have also the air conditioned condenser, which are disturbing. We have inner court, which were blocked with all kind of, again, agglomerating of and extending small apartments. It's normally very small apartments. And then the roofs are being used for many things, garbage, boilers, condensers, whatever. We'll speak about it later. And also the question of the plaster. In the past, Akko used to be a plastered city, rendered with lime plaster, something like that, let's say. But today, what happens is that we have almost none of the houses in Akko are plastered. This is an addition we let them do, but we force them to do a plaster because it's made out of light materials. So we don't want to see those materials, and we're allowed to do it because of the weight. But the buildings are not plastered because plaster needs maintenance, and maintenance is not something that is done, at least in our region. So it's difficult that the physical conditions with the salt and with the lime, and which is not suitable always, it's very difficult to find good render that will. So if they render, they put cement inside, and we know what's the problem. Then it doesn't breathe, and so we prefer to have it like that the stone is breathing, than to have cement plaster. I jumped to Tel Aviv, again World Heritage City, but completely from a different period. It's a modernist city on the coast, Mediterranean coast. So it's a bit kind of 150 kilometers south of Akko. It started as a neighborhood outside of Jaffa. Jaffa was this city with a small port, but one of the main ports. And it was mainly an Arab city. And Tel Aviv started as a neighborhood. And then it developed so it started in 1909, so it is a bit more than 100 years old. But Jaffa is again 6,000. And then in the 30s, with very big immigration from Europe, of Jews from Europe, it grew and it became really the powerhouse of Palestine at that time. A Jewish, they say the first Jewish city, the first Hebrew city, and it actually, it's today a city of almost 500,000 people, but it's in the middle of a metropolis which is about 2.5 million people. So, but economically, culturally, that's the capital of Israel, and not Jerusalem, as many European countries think. This ugly building, or not so beautiful building, is where the Estonian embassy is located. Therefore, I put it in. And actually, from inside, you have a very nice view on the white city of Tel Aviv, on the World Heritage Site, on the sea. So I wanted to give the Estonian a little bit of information if they come to Tel Aviv. That's where your embassy is. You can see quite nice how Tel Aviv, the white city, which is a protected area, is being surrounded by towers. So in the beginning, when Jewish architects came to Palestine in the turn of the century, of the 20th century, they tried to look for, let's call it Jewish architecture which resembles the Jewishness, but also they tried to get also ideas about how to build in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, climate-wise. So they used all kind of features. They took from local craftsmen and local architecture. Those upper buildings are not from Tel Aviv, but I brought them because of the architect, and this is the first building of the Technion where we are teaching Ruth and I. But it's now the National Science Museum. But the houses you see below are houses in Tel Aviv, which were built in the, let's say, early 20s or a little bit before, in a very eclectic style, when Jewish architects tried to search their way in what is suitable for Mediterranean climate, but also for the new nation building itself. At that point, in the early 20s, Patrick Geddes come into the picture. Patrick Geddes, a Scottish, he was a botanist, biologist, but he had a lot of influence on urbanism. At that time, he came with ideas from the Garden City, and he has his own ideas. And Geddes was appointed by the British, no, it wasn't the British.
By the Jews, actually.
By the Jews. But he came to Palestine from the 20s, and he advised from Jerusalem, Haifa, but Tel Aviv invited him to do this plan, which actually, as I read, is the only really plan that Geddes, which was implemented in such a scale. So his plan is actually, until today, sort of the core of historic Tel Aviv. This is a Geddes plan that it started to develop. The ideas were very clear and of building blocks and green areas inside the block gardens and the direction of the street. But the municipality of Tel Aviv later, due to pressures to build and densify, have changed. But the basics are actually there. And Geddes has taken also the direction of the northwest winds, which are the typical cooler winds in the summer, as a kind of a direction for the street leading to the sea. And the plan was afterwards also taken by the Tel Aviv municipality and changed, but it kept its main things. And what is interesting also is to see the direction of the north-south street, which I mentioned talking about Akko. They did now research, I showed it to Uti, that the cooler streets are the red ones. To the north, the north-south streets are the cooler ones, which is very important. It's important streets, main arteries of the city, but they are cooler than the streets which are perpendicular to the sea. And that's quite logical, again, because of the direction of the... That's Tel Aviv in the 40s, with the gardens that I mentioned before, and this is Tel Aviv area, central area today, very dense. And a little bit about the World Heritage Site. So this is the red thing is the buffer zone of the White City. White City, again, 2003, one of the first Israeli sites. And the blue is the declared areas with this kind of enclave here. So we have about 4,000 buildings within this area in Tel Aviv of the international style. Thousands of them are in the nominated zone, the blue one, and hundreds of them are, or only 100 of them are listed with highest grade regarding conservation. Also in Tel Aviv, the criteria were referring to the climatic adaptation. So they said that influences were adapted to climatic conditions of the place, and also the architecture of the early 20s adapted to the requirement of particular geographic context. So that is one of the things which are, we can see that by the initial thought about low building height, ratio of the street and the building height, and sufficient place for between the buildings to let ventilation. We have also flat roofs and small openings, shading elements, lintels from the south to shade, and the breakout of the mass, which is also climatic, but it comes also from the ideology. Some of the buildings as they were in the 30s mostly and 40s. This is one of the Vogue covers with this iconic building, which is, so the whole architecture was very iconic and became also kind of hip, for sure for the Tel Avivian, but Israelis, but also in the world. Tel Aviv, until the wars that we are having now, it's quite an interesting destination for clubbers, gays, and tourists at all. Architecture tourists also. There's some pictures of the buildings as they are today, some with additions. I will talk about the additions, but those are not with additions. And the White City was actually, a new style was created there for modernism, influenced by other modernists like Le Corbusier, like the Bauhaus school. You should know that most of people call Tel Aviv the Bauhaus city, but it was not built only, or mostly not by Bauhaus graduates. But that's a common mistake. It's already branding of the city, so it's hard to resist it. Also the principles of Gropius from the Bauhaus, Mendelssohn with the rounded balconies, and Le Corbusier with the ideas of the 5 principles of Le Corbusier. Some of them have also influence on the climatic things. But finally, architects, and the architects were Jewish who immigrated from Europe. They came with European education, they came to Palestine, and they have sort of took from all those influences, but also referred to the climatic. So you can see this building is kind of a eclectic modernism from all those influences. They also were busy with the ideas of Le Corbusier, with the radiation and with the sun, ventilation schemes, how a building should be ventilated and how the facade should be shaded, and a lot of ideas from Le Corbusier of the windows, the horizontal windows became into horizontal balconies in Palestine. But the problem was that they used new materials and not the old materials, and they covered them with plaster, but the walls were thin and the roof were thin and the windows were glazed in a poorly way. So that what all those things, and they used the concrete a lot of times, also bricks, but bricks from the local ones, or lime bricks, which is silicate. It's a material which was used. But the thing that radiation was penetrating the buildings, and there was not enough thermal mass like in the traditional buildings. And that created quite difficult conditions. What happened also that the lots were, so the whole plan was densified, and the buildings became higher, and the wrong orientation of some of the blocks, of half of the blocks were not orientated to the wind, but on the opposite side. And Wittkovel, I bring him again, another German Jew architect who came to Palestine in the 30s. What happened that until in the 20s and 30s, the buildings were, according to European conceptions of pointing to the wind direction and ventilating the houses for healthy rooms and healthy people. In Palestine, it didn't work. It worked a little bit, but it didn't work really hard because the radiation is the most important factor. And Wittkovel, he was an architect, but he gathered some scientists around him, and he did the research about it. And his conclusion was that you should build the buildings always the long facade facing north and south, because the sun is coming from the east, and that's a way you can avoid radiation better than any other direction. And it changed something, because in the late 40s, after the State of Israel was established, we got the brutalism also influence, and buildings started to be more orientated towards solar solutions or shading solutions with very deep balconies and a lot of shades, and they use this kind of local or modern version of the Arab or Mediterranean mashrabiyah, the thing which is kind of shading the windows and the roofs. And so there is this kind of concrete version of it, and you can see that the buildings really became with deep facade and with much higher thermal mass, which meant better conditions. We don't have air conditioning at that time in Israel, so we are still before the air conditioned area. In Tel Aviv, we have the layer 2 additions on the heritage buildings. That's a policy which was already in Tel Aviv before the World Heritage nomination, and it depends on which building and what its definition in the conservation plan. But Tel Aviv is very liberal with additions on a modernistic building. You can see here some additions. Some of them are done, according to me, very nicely, and kind of respecting very much the original modernist principles, and some are different, but and on the eclectic buildings they look really eclectic. So at least eclecticism is continuing. The idea is that if you have 3 levels, you can add another 2.5, and the reason for it is money. So if a contractor or a developer is building another 2 levels, he can renovate the lower floors, conserve them, and make them nice again, like making them again nice. And but it's a profit, so that's an important point. This is one typical cycle which a building like that went through from 1935 to later. You can see people used to close the balconies and start to have air conditions on the fronts and all kind of things on the roof. And then in this 2002, Baro and Gazit did another edition of two levels in 2.5 levels. And that's a sort of a practice. So if we speak about the 30s, 20s, and we speak today, in urban changes, they are very big, and traffic is so much more today. So the idea of people opening their windows and sitting in the balconies is not sustainable anymore for people in many ways. It's not that they don't use it,
but the conditions are very different. Densification is, as I said, and global warming, temperature are higher, and those buildings are not fitted for this kind of temperatures. I mean the original ones, also the thin walls and ceilings, I mentioned all those things. Today people want bigger apartments, and we're talking again about air conditioning from the 90s on. It became a standard, for sure, in Tel Aviv. Television I wrote because people don't sit in the balconies anymore, they watch television. And reinforcement of the buildings, we need it for security reasons, but also for seismic reasons. So this kind of additions also promote this kind of shelter rooms in each apartment, and also reinforce the building for seismic. We are in a seismic area in Israel, and there is no law about green standardization, but I will speak about it in the short time I have. So if we understand that radiation or from the facades and windows and roof, we have like 75% of the exposure and the way energy gets away. So that's something to deal with. And then we have on the roof, we have those facilities for warming water, and now the question of photovoltaic panels. And also we know that air conditioning and a little bit of heating, but mostly air conditioning is 30% to 40% of the energy consumption for an average household. So the high cost for conservation. So conservation in Tel Aviv is very costly, and it's very difficult to impose also the energy efficiency regulations and so on that. And the thing that they say that when you have to put outside thermal insulation, then it will change the proportions of the buildings. And the proportions of the building is part of the value. It also, the change of materials, for example, of the windows and of the plaster, and replacement of the windows, the frames, and it's also a matter for authenticity, losing it. And also those installations disfigure the roofs or the gardens or even the walls. So this is also an hinder. And the shading elements, modern ones, also are changing the values. Tel Aviv municipality did try to deal with this, they call it green conservation. They updated it last year with kind of advices for the people what to do. We have also the Green Renovation Manual, it's a governmental, from the Ministry of Environmental Protection. And they mostly recommend to insulate better, have the walls lighter, insulate also to use the floors as thermal mass, re-establish the ventilation, the original ventilation elements, replacing the windows to more insulating systems. Normally the windows are wood, and it's difficult to put the double glazing if you don't use very specific systems. Introducing shaders, installing sun screening coating on some of the windows which are not on the front, on the street, and improving the AC installation efficiency. So always improving, so having a higher level of energy efficiency. We have a norm which is actually from 2023, is kind of became the standard for new buildings, but it's not implemented so much on heritage buildings, and unless it's a voluntary thing. In Tel Aviv, they adopted already in 2013 the norm, but they don't apply it on heritage buildings, and that's because what I've shown before. We have the roofs of Tel Aviv, and the big thing that it's not a very big roof, 200 square meters for 6 to 8 or 10 apartments. And then you have the air conditions, which we want to put on the roof. We also want to put the sun boilers, which are compulsory and mandatory in Israel to put on the roofs. So each apartment needs, and then we want to put already also the photovoltaic things, and then we want to have also a green roof and to have some green in the city, and we also want to have a social place, a meeting place for the tenants. So everything has to be on those roofs, and this is impossible. This is not realistic, and therefore they have to be compromised. About the layer 2 thing, I think it can improve because it's insulating the old roofs by building on top of it, and then it's also improving the replacement of all systems within the older building, and then it's also you can create a more custom roofs for energy installations which are more effective. And also another aspect of sustainability is that you're adding new life to the city without demolishing building. But so it's maybe not a wonderful solution, but it's sort of can contribute also. This building looked like that, by the way, in the 40s. So it maybe can come back to its situation. It's my Photoshop, so it's quite. It's like that, and I did anyway. A little bit about Akko. So Akko is. I go back to Akko to vernacular and the question of photovoltaic. Some of the people who were in Wisby know this basically. I've looked at the other roofs in Mediterranean World Heritage City, like in Morocco, Tunis. Something closer to us is Rhodos, which is a little bit more like Akko. And we can see already in the other examples much less intervention on the roofs, but here in Greece already sun boilers and satellite dishes, etc. Also in Valletta in Malta, you have also sun boilers and dishes, but I think the culture there is of using those rooftops more than in other places. This is Jerusalem, old city. What is typical to our roofs in our region is that it's part of the urban integrity. It's a fifth, so it's a historical profile of the city. It's a fifth facade. It's visible from many places. It is also a tradition of using the roofs. Some cultural aspects, in some places it's not so much, as I also know. It has a three-dimensional complexity, which is part of the values, and those cities are living cities, so it means we have to see how people live in them in good conditions and in an affordable way. So solar energy is a very important energy. I don't have to explain it here, so it's going to be more and more important in our energy production. Maybe this is a trend. I don't know if it will continue, but there are advantages. As they say, sunlight is abundant. It will be 25% of the market. They fit public and private, small and big, which is quite attractive. And they can also generate income, which is important also for a place for Akko. It's also much cheaper to installate it today. So the prices go down, and you can decrease the surface. So solar is the Superman of the green energy. I know it's not, but let's assume that it's all clean product, and after 20 years it's being dismantled and used as tents or I don't know what. So I think that we've spoken with somebody about it. I think we have to mitigate this issue. We cannot just say no to solar panels in the old city of Akko, because it doesn't work like that over there. People, as I said, tend to do things if they think it's good for them and worth for them and affordable, and therefore they will do it. So if we had roofs like that in the 1918, very kind of with nothing on, it starts to change in the 50s, and then came the television antenna, if you remember them, and the sun boilers. In the 60s also became, as I said, from the 70s, because of the oil crisis of 1974, if you remember the oil embargo, it was a catalyst for those sun boilers to be obligatory in Israel. So every house has to have a sun boiler unless it's higher than 6 floors or something like that. But it saves a lot of electricity, and so it became part of the roof scape of many Israeli cities. But it's efficient. And the roofs of Akko are full of those sun boilers, and as you can see, all the goodies are on the roofs. So we have a lot of concerns with putting sun panels on the roofs, as you agree with me. There are many reasons why not to put them. I think because of heritage only, but there are many other reasons, but maintenance is very low, so I think you mentioned those reasons why not. We have also the issue of big roofs. So if we let the small roofs and the big roofs public, and then it will be a huge disaster. So with those reasons, we have concerns. It's a kind of a manual they have from the National Heritage Institute in Czech Republic, which try to mitigate this idea of where is possible to put sun panels. So it was kind of illustrative, but I'm not sure it works for us. I did try to take a typical roofscape of Akko with all the mess and think what happens if we use panels which are kind of flat, not the one with the metal structure, but more advanced ones, and we put them on the roofs, what influence it will have. And maybe the colors can be different, because today you can have them in different colors. But we have a lot of technical issues, like the original roofs were from wood, and we tried to implement more wooden roofs instead of concrete because it's not good. But we have the small roofs because of the size of the units. The weight, the traditional roofs are made from wood normally, very simple, and all the structures on top of the roof might be a problem. And we have also the shading effect of the uneven building, so a lot of roofs are covered with shade, so it's not efficient for them. People then will have difficulty to access the roof for installation, but also for maintenance, which is a problem. And then we have a small parapet on the roofs, and then it will require flat panels, and then flat panels means less efficiency. So we have also regulatory issues. As I said, enforcement is very weak in the city. So even if we get to agreement about a good solution of visual solution, probably it will not be implemented. And there is no obligation to do that. And there is also a very complex structure of units, that those units elements, maybe in, let's say, shades on the roofs. We can make them maybe adaptive more to the color. And if everybody will have it, then we'll have much less wires and poles. And so it has also this kind of effect. And we have also the microgrid element. I will speak about it. So normally it would be something like that. And in roofs like that, you could put panels like that. This is very bad, so we don't want to have that. But in the name of equality, why those buildings won't have it? So that's a problem. And we know that if we ask to do like that, people will do the cheapest one and the easiest one and maybe the more efficient ones, which is bad. And also they will put it everywhere to get more electricity. So maybe shades like that we permit to do with solar elements can work. So all those questions bring me to the conclusion about Akko, and what I say that I think it needs to have sort of a investigation. I don't think we can say, I think we have to be prepared for this kind of change, but it has to be investigated and maybe find recommendations, but we should do it now. There are new systems like solar cooling systems, which are very complicated and they need big areas. So you can see this kind of solutions. They are implemented a lot in Europe, by the way, but they need big areas, so they're not suitable for housing units. But we have this kind of local, small and cheap solution, which is air conditioned with sun panels. So they get their electricity in the day from the sun panel, and in the evening they are. So this is not the ones I think are fit to Akko, but they are developed, and in India you have many of them. And so it's a kind of quite minimal solution to have. And then in the evening you plug it to the AC. So it's combined, it's a hybrid. But the problem that we have normally in household, we have more than one unit, so we will need few of them on the roof. So, but maybe it's a sort of solution how to get the energy for the air conditioning. What are the alternatives is to have what I call solar energy rights. So it means that in cities like Akko, World Heritage City, or cities that we cannot have them for many reasons, maybe we can produce electricity in central place, the city or the government, and have those people who live in Akko, people who are not in economical good situation, the ability to have those sun rights instead of installing those panels for each family. And then the creation of microgrid is also very important in our. I brought this for the main conclusion is from the Israeli Council for Green Building is so they write on their web page the reasons why should I do a green building, why it is worse for me. So the question is what does it good for me, not for the big global warming, and how much it saves on expenses. And I think that's maybe part of the solutions. So those are my conclusions. I don't have time. But that's for you, Estonian. And I have a few points for discussion. Maybe we can do it after together. Is the top-down initiatives or the bottom-up processes? What are from the experience of Akko? I think it's quite interesting because when people have motivation to do it economically, maybe that's the way to go forward. And then how flexible are the authorities? How we are flexible to have those kind of changes and modifications. And the last thing is about those energy banks. So how can we can create those communal solar or renewable energy bank, and in that way sort of have compensation for people who cannot have it, but encourage them to use green energy and to have the economical beneficial from that. So this is it. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm over the time.
I did notice that the trend of somewhat ignoring passive, tried and true, solutions that provide thermal comfort, in the case of Estonia, it's very passive measures that provide air tightness of a building, very simple wallpaper on the interior side that people remove due to aesthetic preferences that then reduce the air tightness of the entire structure. It's very like I felt a very similar situation. For example, like ignoring the rendering on on a historic building that will like increase the amount of heat that the walls will absorb. So I do see an interesting like international trend in a way. That I don't know is maybe tied to lack of maintenance. Is it perhaps tied to this sort of a more consumerist mindset that we can replace things? We don't need to deal with maintenance as much. I don't know.
Maintenance is a huge factor in the fact in ACO for sure when people don't have money and the state doesn't give them incentives or reduction or a kind of support. So maintenance, it's also a matter of culture. We have other problems. The building is, and it's not theirs, so they say it doesn't belong to us anyway. So it's ownership also in this case. But maintenance is a huge problem. If maintenance was something more predictable and common, then I think many of the things of the roofs that you have seen would have looked different. And we could also the facades and the window and the blinds, and they put the blinds but never paint them. So finally they fall apart with the salt and with the sun. So,
but it's still funny that even in the earlier days, people were still conscious of like resource efficiency. You didn't want to waste anything.
Yes.
And it's still the same situation somewhat, but we're not maintaining what we already have. We're letting it decay. We're not understanding like the passive function of like simple things, blinds, verandas, for example, rendering. So I do think it's sort of, it's a very interesting correlation, I believe. And yeah, of course.
Well, I'm sort of talking about someone else's work. I mentioned this yesterday, that there's a wonderful young architect, Narika, what is Larika's last name? She comes from Jodhpur in India. She's working
sort of, well, in Estonian climate is very different. For example, but we do have a specific day when we install, for example, winter frames into our windows, and when we retight like the lateral grooves in our like log walls, and it's called Miklipäev, and that is the main point in the calendar when you're supposed to do these sort of small regular improvements to your boundary surfaces and structures in preparation for the colder months to raise the energy performance of the building, basically. So it doesn't have a very communal aspect to it, and I'm afraid the day has lost some of its prevalence. So, but in terms of like our Build Us project, we also use it a bit in a communication that it's very historic, it's part of our culture, and it's already helping us achieve like climate goals. So it can be, it definitely, we believe has potential to be a social affair. Why not?
I want to thank you for all the information and all for the lectures and the discussions that we had here. It's kind of encouraging and not discouraging us, because we are, it's something we should really work on it, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.